So right now I have my Finder window opened up on a Mac computer. Now in here I've downloaded 3 files. I'll show you them. So the first one is a picture of someone's face with some pimples. The next image is a shot with some graffiti on a pillar. So we'll be using these 3 files to alter the image in some way. Now the next folder we have is the logos folder, and in here we have an EPS file and a PNG file. So we'll get to those a little later in the course. So now we have Photoshop. Now I've set up the workspace to Essentials default. If you don't see any of these panels, that's okay. We'll get to that in a minute. So this is the basic layout of Photoshop. You have tools on the side. You have some additional options up here. You have a whole bunch of different stuff like, the layer panel, the navigator, history, character window. And then up at the top, just like most programs, you have all of these different options up here. So first, let's go into window. This will be where all of the panels exist. So for example, if the navigator was closed and you don't see it on your screen, go into window. Let's open up navigator, and then that pops back up. Same thing with, let's say, character. So we'll go into window. We'll navigate all the way down until we see it. Here's character, and then there are those functions as well. Now, just like that, we have layers right here, and you can see the other ones that are open. On the left side here, we have a bunch of different tools. We have our main selection tool. This is the rectangular marquee tool, and if you click and hold, you can see that there are some different options. For example, a circle here, or some different shapes. Now you'll see that pretty much every single tool has a tiny arrow in the bottom right corner. That means that if you click and hold, you'll get additional options, and that means basically new tools. Down here we have some different colors. This is your first selection color, and this is your background selection color or your second color. Over here we have our character window. So basically if we were to start typing, this is where we can edit that stuff. If we were to create a new layer, the layers would show up over here. And in the next lesson, we will start creating a new Photoshop project. Okay guys, welcome back. So let's get started. Let's go up to File. We'll go to New. Now this window opens up. Now we can give this project a name. New Project 1. Now this is the size of the actual Photoshop canvas or the project itself. This is the resolution, obviously. So I always work in pixels, but if you are going to print, you can work in inches if you prefer that. Let's go pixels on both. We'll make this 1920 by 1080 because I tend to work with a lot of video stuff, so I just keep it as a high definition width and height. So 1920 by 1080. A resolution of 72 is fine. If you want a higher resolution, let's say you're printing a gigantic banner, then you can go to 300. Color mode RGB. Again, if you are going to print, I would suggest switching to CMYK, but for all web stuff, stick with RGB. Background contents is white, that's fine. Color profile sRGB, that's good, and square pixels. Okay, so that's basically the setup. We can save a preset if we want, and we will go to OK. Now this is what opens up. It automatically created a white background layer, and you'll see over here that it is locked. So the way to unlock that is you hold Alt or Option. So Alt on a PC or Option on a Mac, and you just double click. That releases the layer. Okay, so with this layer selected, you can see that if we go over here with the main selection tool selected, we can click and drag this wherever we want, and it's the same size as our project canvas. So if you drag it all the way up, you'll see that it auto snaps, and you'll see by the lines that show up that this is now back into its original position. Okay, so now that we have this HD project set up, if we wanted to work, for example, in a larger resolution such as 4K, we can do that by going to File, New, and then altering this, which will make a new project. Or we can go to Image, Canvas Size, change this to pixels, and then put in what we want. So in this case, we'll do 3840 by 2160. We'll click OK. and then you can see it made it much larger. So up here in our navigator, this gives you a representation of your entire document, and it allows you to zoom in quickly or zoom out. And if you're zoomed in, you can easily take this piece and navigate throughout your image just by clicking and dragging. So it makes things very quick. Okay, so let's go back out to 100%. And then actually we'll zoom out just a bit more, so we can see the whole image. Now, what happened here is the original layer that was created when we created the HD project still exists, but we've changed the canvas size. So we have a layer here that's set up as HD, but a project of 4K. So to make this white layer larger, we can do a few things. So we can scale it up, which I'll show you now. So we can go to Edit, Transform, Scale, and then we can go to any corner, click, hold Shift so the scaling stays relative. Okay, so just like that. If you don't hold Shift, then you can change it like this, but we want it to stay relative, so we'll hold Shift, and then we'll scale it up, and then we'll let go of Shift, and we'll bring it down. Okay, so it's not quite as big, so what we can do is hold Shift again and just make it a little larger. And then we can use the arrow keys on our keyboard, so we make sure that it's larger than the project size. All right, so now that this is done, we need to accept that we've changed the scale. So we can just hit return on the keyboard. Okay, and you see that that updated as something that we've done in the history. So now that that is done, we can try a different way. So let's go back in time to the canvas. And what we can actually do is delete this if we wanted. So we'll click yes, and then we're back at this stage. Okay, now if you don't have that, again, you just go to Window and then go to History. So if we click down here in our first color, or our foreground color, this window opens up for the color picker. So if we move this to the side and select this image, it will select the exact color that this is, which is pure white, as you can see in the top left corner. So we hit OK. And now by having our paint bucket tool selected, if we click in the area that doesn't have white, as long as we're on this layer as well, it'll fill in the rest of the image pure white. So now this image, when selected, you'll see is now the size of 4K. If we wanted to change the background color, we will select the image, choose our paint bucket, go to the image, and let's say we want it that color. Let's go to our main selection tool so we can get back to moving things around. If we wanted a second colored layer, we can go to Layer, New, select Layer. We can give it a name if we want, or we can change the name later. So we'll go to OK. And now over here, we will select the layer. We will double click, and then we can give it a name if we want. So this one will be called Red, and then our new one will be called Blue. And now with the blue layer selected, we can go back to our paint bucket tool, and we'll make this, as we described it, blue, and we'll make this one blue. Let's go back to our main selection tool, and now you'll see over here we have two layers, one blue and one red. So on the side here we have this eyeball symbol. If you click that, it'll turn off that layer temporarily until it's turned back on. Okay, and that basically reveals the layer below it. So with this layer on, we can't see the red because blue is above it. Okay, so with this off, we can see the red. With it on, it's not there. So what we can also do, if we wanted red on top, we can click, hold, and drag it to the top. And then now red is on top, so we don't see the blue. So if we wanted to see the blue, we can turn off the red. And that's basically the layering system inside most editing programs such as, Photoshop, After Effects, Premiere Pro, and so on. Now, if we wanted to delete this layer, for example, we can simply select it, right-click it, go to Delete Layer. We could duplicate the layer. If we wanted a second copy of it, then we can, again, double-click and call this Red 2, for example, to keep things a little more organized. We don't want this, so we can either go right-click, delete, or we can select the layer and go down here to the little trash can, and then delete that layer. Okay, now if we wanted this layer, the top layer, to be a little bit transparent so we can see through it to slightly reveal the blue layer, we can do that easily by selecting the top layer, going to opacity, and then adjusting to taste. And you'll see here as we do this, it'll change as we go. Okay, so that is completely off. So at 0, it'll be the same as turning off the eyeball. And at 100%, we will not see the blue layer at all. And the next thing we'll do is import an image. So let's go to File. We will go to Open. And then we will go into where our images were. So in Inside Images. Okay, so let's just bring in this image right here. Now you'll see right now that the blue layer is no longer here. And that's because when we went to File, Open, it brought it in as another project inside Photoshop. Okay, so if we wanted to go to the original, it's right there, and here's the new one we brought in. Okay, and that's basically like you opened up a new tab in your internet browser, for example. In this case, we don't want to do that. So what we actually want to do is import it into this layer. So now what I like to do is simply drag it in. So what I do is I Command Tab over to where the image exists on my computer. So in this case, on my Mac, it's inside Finder, inside on my desktop in Images. I will click and hold this, and while holding it, I will Command Tab back into Photoshop while still holding, and I will let go, and then it shows up in this layer. It showed up very small because it's not a large image. I believe it's around high definition. Keep in mind, this project is 4K. So what we can do is we'll click the top corner here. We'll hold Shift, and then we will scale it up just a bit. Let's try like that, and we will center it by just dragging it to roughly the center until it locks into place here. We will click Return. Now we have the image in the middle, and I did basically a rough scale, so I don't know what actual size this is. Okay, then we will go to Canvas, and we'll change it to pixels, and we'll go back to 1920 by 1080. We'll click OK. It's warning us that the image may be cropped, so we'll click Proceed, and then what happened was it cropped some of the blue. So in this case, we will right click, go to Delete, as we don't need the blue layer anymore. And now that we're on this layer, we will select it. We'll go to Edit, Transform, Scale once more, and we will scale it with holding Shift up until it fills the screen. Click Return, and now we have an image inside Photoshop. Okay, so let's bring another layer in. So we'll bring in the graffiti one. Click and drag, Command Tab, let go here. Now with graffiti selected, click, hold Shift, scale it up, and we'll just adjust it a little bit. Now it will crop a little bit of the image, so we'll hit Return because the project canvas size isn't as large as the image. So if you did want to create a canvas size as big as the image, then what I'd suggest doing is just click, right click, and then in your open with, you'll see Photoshop. Okay, so right now we won't worry about the top layer, so we'll turn this off. And what we'll do is we will bring in our third and last image we have here. Now you can see that this image is very tall. That is fine. What we'll do is we'll just scale it up as big as it gets. And we'll just leave it like that, for example. Okay, so we'll put that to the very bottom. We have this layer up here. Okay, and let's use our navigator to zoom in just a bit. Okay, so before we go into altering images and whatnot, I just want to explain a few things. So with this layer selected, you'll see that in the bottom right corner of the image here, there's a little symbol. And when you import certain images, they might show up as a smart object. And basically what that means is it will preserve an image's source content with all its original characteristics. So basically what that means is it enables you to perform non-destructive editing to that image or layer. Okay, so in order to change certain things, such as crop, you'll have to convert it from a smart object. In this case, we will rasterize the layer. And now you'll see that that symbol is gone. So this layer has been rasterized, and then we'll be able to crop it now. Okay, so let's go to our crop tool, which is up here. And now you'll see that on the outside corners, we can drag anywhere we want and crop the image. So let's just crop a bit of the bottom here to right there. And then we will hit return, and that will save that as well. So if we wanted to try that again, we can click here, and then you'll notice that we could go back and reveal and make this canvas size much larger to make up for the photo that was more vertical. Let's say we wanted that. Let's go to crop. Okay, now we have a canvas that is taller than it is long, but we don't really want that. So once again, we can go to our crop tool, or we can just simply press C on our keyboard, and then we will crop the image to where we want it. And then hit return on the keyboard, and the image has been successfully cropped. We'll zoom in just a bit here, and we'll go back to our selection tool. Okay, the next thing I'll show you is effects on a layer. So if we select this layer and go to blending options at the top, this will open up, which is the layer style, and we'll have a whole bunch of different options here. So when something is selected, you'll see that the image now has a bevel. We can easily add different effects to this, so basically that's checked on now. If we select this, we can start editing that specific effect, so we can make it so that effect isn't showing up at all, or we can completely show that effect. Okay, and it's just very quick ways to improve an image, change it, or do exactly what you want with it. So we can do a gradient overlay if we wanted, or let's say a pattern overlay, and then again we can change the transparency. If we wanted a slight texture over it, for example, just like that. Okay, in this case we don't want anything, so we'll just leave it off. We'll go to OK. Another way to get into it is by double-clicking the layer, and then the layer style will open up. And you can do that on any layer. So if we started to work on just this, then the effects we created will only affect that layer. And once again, if we go to the bottom, if we did something here, it would only affect the bottom layer because that's the layer we're working on. Okay, so now let's check out some of the other tools. So let's make sure our top layer is selected. We'll go to our rectangular marquee tool. Okay, if you hold it here, you can see what it actually is. Okay, let's click and hold. Let's go to the elliptical, for example. Now if we click and drag, and this is basically going to be what we select. So let's just pick a random spot here. Let's say that. Okay, and now what we're going to simply do is hit delete on the keyboard. And what that does is it reveals the layer underneath. Okay, so if we go back to our selection tool, you'll see that it's still being selected. So all you have to do for that is Command D, or go up to select and click on deselect, which shows you what up here. Okay, and I don't really want that, so I'll go back to layer style. Okay, so we'll try this again with rectangular marquee. So we will select just that. We will hit delete, and that's the area of the photo that we've now deleted. So we can go to select, deselect, and that is done. Once again, we'll go back to the original, go back to this. Now we can go to the lasso tool, and this basically means that we can click and drag and draw whatever we want, whatever shape, and that's going to be the selection area that deletes. Okay, so let's go back to layer. So next we have the magic wand tool, and for this example, because there's a lot of different detail in this shot, it wouldn't work too well for this. But if we go into this shot, for example, we have a huge difference from, the edge of this person's face to the white on the left here. So this would be a great example of how to cut out this spot very easily. Up here we have our tolerance. If we increase this to, let's say, 40 and select here, you'll see that it didn't quite get the bottom here. So we can either hold shift and click there to select an additional area, or we can increase the tolerance, go to select, deselect, and then try it again. So now it's selected a little more. So let's go to 60, deselect, we'll try it again. Okay, and if you hit delete, now just like we had before, it's because this is not rasterized. So if we click OK, We will right click here, we will go to rasterize layer, and then now we can start removing things from the layer. With it still selected, hit delete, and then if you press Command D on the keyboard to deselect, now very easily and quickly we are revealing just the image behind. Okay, so let's just go back here. Okay, now we could select other things such as, let's say, the lips. Now this will be a little more difficult, so with tolerance, let's say set to 15, we will click a part of the lip and then we'll hold shift and we'll just try to increase the size until we've included all of what we want to select. We're just still holding shift. Okay, now you'll see it's selected a part up here that I don't want, so we'll hold Option and then remove that, and we'll just try to clean it up just a bit. Okay, so that did a pretty good job. So now if we wanted to do that, we could right-click, duplicate the layer. Now on our duplicated layer, which is our copy layer, what we can do is go to Select and go to Inverse. Now what that does is it basically selects everything but the lips. So on the top layer, we will hit delete. And now it looks like nothing has been done, but as you can see here in the little image, we've deleted everything but the lips. Okay, so let's go to select, deselect. And to show you what I've done here, I'm going to just make sure that bottom layer is turned off. So on this layer here, if we turn it off, now on this layer, it's just the lips. Okay, so we can get some really cool effects. For example, making the lips more red. So we'll turn this layer back on. And on the top layer, which just has the lips, and we can actually name this. So that's just the lips. Now with just the lips layer selected, we can go to Image, Adjustments, and then we'll have a whole bunch of options here that we can affect just this single layer with. Okay, so we can go to, for example, Brightness and Contrast. And if we brighten it up, you'll see that it's just the lips, or contrast. So, okay, so we'll go to cancel, go to adjustments, so we can go to curves, for example, and then we can click on the line and make some pivot points, and then just select the darker parts of the image, or the brighter parts, or the mids. So right here, okay, we'll just make the lips just a little darker. Okay. And then we can make the highlights in the lips a little brighter. And then we'll click OK. Okay, so now that has one effect on it. So another thing we could do is make the lips more vibrant. So like she's wearing lipstick. Okay, and there's a whole bunch of other effects we can do. We can just make the lips black and white. Now, of course, if you go drastic like this, the edges won't look that great because you did select it with just the magic wand tool, so it's not perfect. From a beginner's perspective, I wouldn't worry about that at this point. So now that we've brightened up the lips a little bit, you can see the difference just by clicking on the eyeball here. So the next thing we could do is on the bottom layer, we can add some more effects to this and change this however we want, and that will not affect the lips because we have the lips layer on top of this layer. Okay, so on this layer, let's go to Image, Adjustments. We'll go to Curves. Okay, so we'll make our 3 points again. Now you don't have to do this, but I just like to do that. So those are 3 points. Now on the bottom here, we'll just darken the overall image. And you can see it's happening in just the hair there. Okay, and that doesn't affect anything else really. Okay, or we can go to the mids. Okay, or we can go to the highlights. And if we wanted to do that, we can start introducing some other stuff, or we can remove some of the whites a bit so the pure white doesn't exist in the image. Now again, if you go too drastic, it's not going to look too good. So the idea here is just subtle things. Alright, I canceled that, but you get the idea. Now another way to add effects is by doing it to everything. So the way we do that is with an adjustment layer. So if we go to New Adjustment Layer, we can choose what we want to do. We can use curves, for example. Okay, we'll hit OK. And now at the top here you can see it has created an adjustment layer and curves has opened up. So we can actually click properties up here and just drag this to its own window if we wanted. Or we can, drag, and you can see the parts are highlighting as I'm going. So if I wanted to make it above the history, I'd do there. Or if I wanted to make it part of the history tab, then it would be selected right there. And now I can go in between these two. Okay, but for now I just want my own. So we'll drag that larger. For this, what we can do is, once again, adjust the whole image at once. So we'll just brighten up the whole image just a bit. Okay, and now if we turn that off, you can see what that does. Now, if we wanted, we could do another one, black and white. And now if we turn that layer off, you can see that that is affecting everything. Or what we can do is we can make it more of a tint effect, which means there's just a little bit of color if we do, something like that. That's a cool way to get some effects as well. Okay, so let's turn those off because we don't really need those for now. Okay, and in this lesson we'll talk about adding text to a Photoshop document. So let's go down here to our type tool, and we will select anywhere on the image. And you'll see here that in the layers panel, a text layer was created, and over here it's blinking, so that means we can start to type. So let's just type in anything we want. So close up of face. We'll go back to our main tool, and then because this layer is selected, I will be able to move that layer around regardless of clicking on it. Okay. Now, if you had auto select on, then you would actually move the background image because it's dependent on where you're clicking. So let's just go back to our type tool and unselect this because I like to actually choose the layer I'm working on. Now, if we wanted to change the text, we can go back to the type tool, select it, and edit it if we want. If we just wanted close-up face, for example. Okay. Now, it's important to understand that you can still edit it as long as it remains a text layer. If you convert this, then you will no longer be able to do anything. In fact, if you try to edit it, it'll just make a new text layer because it doesn't recognize this as a text layer anymore. Okay, so let's go back to new type layer. So with that selected, we can change the sizing if we wanted. We can go make it much smaller, or we can make it much bigger. And again, but just by clicking anywhere, we can center it perfectly if we wanted. Okay, and we can, change the color if we wanted. Okay, and we can also add effects to this just like the other layers. So if you double click that or go to right click blending options, you'll have a whole bunch of different options here. For example, I tended to use drop shadow. So if you click on and enable the drop shadow and then go into that, you can change the opacity, the type of blend mode and everything. So what we want to change is the distance. So we only want this to be about 5. The spread we want 0. And just like that. So without it and with it. Okay, so that can help a lot with having text stand out on your image. You can also do stuff like outer glows, inner shadows, inner glows. You can add textures. So it's very powerful stuff. So let's go to OK. And if you wanted a different font, you could just go up here and just type in whichever font you wanted. Okay. Now, if you wanted to have different sized font in Photoshop, you can do that as well. So what you can do is literally just go to a new layer and just type in, whatever you want to say here. So acne. And then on that layer, we can, do whatever we want. We can make it super small. We can change the color of that. And that's because it's on a different layer. Okay, so this layer is all this. This layer is just that. And now also, if we go back to our black and white here, if we enable it, you'll see that it hasn't affected this stuff, and that's because in the layer system, it's below our text stuff. So if we drag that up to the top, then it will affect the text layers. And once again, this is at 74%, so it isn't perfectly black and white. So if we go up to 100, then it does make it complete black and white. So let's turn that off. We'll bring our other curves effect up to the top as well. And if we turn that on, you'll see what it does. Okay, so we don't need that, so we'll just go to delete. Another thing we can do is we can go to our brush tool, and you can see that we have our face acne layer selected. So if we draw here, I've actually drawn this line right on that layer. Okay, and I showed you this because that is not what you want to do. Instead, let's undo. And also I should note that in Photoshop, you'll only get one undo unless you hold Command Option and Z, and then you'll have multiple undos, or you can use your history panel as we've been doing. Okay, so instead of drawing on your actual image, it's better to work non-destructively. So what we can do is go to Layer, New, and then now we have a layer here, and it's completely blank. So if we turn off all of these, you'll see that there's nothing in it. So with our brush tool selected, we can, draw whatever we want here. This showed up blue because we have it selected here as blue. So if we wanted something else, we could do this, and then we could, do whatever we want. Go over it again. It's not going to work too well if you're using a mouse, but if you do have one of those digital pens, that would work great. So we also have pencil tools, which are very thin if you want to get some cool thinner lines. Now back to the brush tool, so let's go back to there. If we click up here, you can see that the size of the brush, now it's huge, or we can make it super small if we wanted. We can change the size of it, so we can change it so that the edges fall off a bit, so it has softer edges. And we can change the color again. And this is happening only on this layer. Okay, so I strongly suggest any work you do in Photoshop, you do it on its own layer. That will save you a lot of time if you ever need to re-edit the project. So let's delete that. The next thing we can try is setting up some shapes. Right here at the top, you can see when this is selected, you get a bunch of different options up here. So we have the fill layer, the stroke layer, the stroke width, and some other options here. This down here affects the fill layer. So if we were to change this back to blue, then you'll see that the fill has been updated. Now right now the stroke is off, but if we did want a stroke, meaning a border around our shape, we can, for example, pick it to be green, and then it auto switched to this here, which means it will have a border or a stroke. If we select the one beside it, then that means there will be no stroke. And let's say we wanted a larger stroke around the shape, so we can make that 10. Now, with it selected, you click and drag, and you can make whatever shape you want. So let's just do that. And then this is what we've created. So we have a blue inside, which is our fill, and our stroke is green, which is around it. If we select this, we no longer can edit it, even though we're still on that layer. But because you can see here it has that symbol, we are still able to edit it non-destructively. If we go back to that tool, those options will appear again, and that's super important to remember. You have to be on the actual tool to see these options. So if we wanted to increase the border size to, much bigger, we can do that, or we can simply turn the border off. If we wanted to change the color, we can do that. Or we can actually pick a very precise color, or we can actually copy and paste in a specific color. All right, and also you'll see here that this properties panel opened up, and that is the same as clicking on here. So you can edit things here if you'd like. So the next thing I will show you is the eraser tool, but you'll see we won't be able to do anything yet because it's still an editable object. So what I tend to do when I'm working on my projects is I right-click on the layer, I duplicate it, and I rasterize that layer, and then I turn off this layer. I bring it to the bottom, and that way if I ever need that layer back again, I can simply turn it on, put it to where I want it, and start editing again. And that is a great way of being non-destructive. So now we have a layer that's copied that has been rasterized, and now you'll see that we can start erasing stuff. So up here you will see that we have a bunch of different options when the eraser tool is selected. We have the opacity. So at 100% it will erase 100% of the area, assuming that you have selected the complete erase tool. If it has this, then it'll show up like that. Let's say you had it only at 10, then it would do that until you erase multiple times to keep doing it. And every time you click, you can go a little more. But if you're at 10, then it'll erase a lot faster. Okay, let's go back to that. Okay, what we can also do is increase the size that we're going to erase. Okay. Or we can select the one that erases perfectly all the way through. You can get some cool shapes and effects and some transparent areas very quickly by creating an object like a shape layer or drawing something on here and then using the eraser tool to just take off a bit of stuff. So that is the eraser tool. Okay, welcome back. So in this lesson, we're going to be cleaning up skin and reshaping some parts of the person's face. So let's go back to this. We'll turn on this layer. So we're only working with this. Now you'll see that there are some marks here on her face, and we can remove these spots very quickly and easily with the spot healing tool, which is right here. Okay, so if we click that, you'll see we have some options up here as well, and that means it's using the colors and everything around it to fill in this spot. Literally all you do is adjust the size so it fills in the area, and then you just click. You can see it looks like it did duplicate and make the exact same 3 marks, but that is a big difference from, and a big improvement from what we had originally. So we could go a step further and go down to there and then just remove those dots if we wanted. And if we spend a few minutes doing this, we can completely clear up this person's skin. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll just adjust the size. And we'll just go around and just remove any spots we see. Now it's important to make it just bigger because you don't want to copy too much data into that spot. Now nowadays, I would say 99.9% of photos you see that are published have been edited like this. Keep that in mind. Okay, so we'll just go down there, we'll remove that. Now also, some people, if there's a mole or something on someone's skin, sometimes that defines them and gives them character. Definitely connect with the person if you are removing something like that from a person's skin to see if they actually want that to happen, because some people would actually like it in the photo. Continue going here. Now even this stuff can be removed, the 2 lines here. So we can go, and it's literally like magic. Now you can see when we just did that last one, it brought in some of the stuff on the fingernails here. So we don't want to do that, so I'm just going to undo that. And then going to shrink it down just a little more. And then that did a better job. So definitely pay attention when you're doing this stuff. Now even the stuff around the lips. If you zoom in completely, there's tons of stuff that you can still remove if you want, but the more you do it, the more you're altering it from the way it originally was. So, of course, keep that in mind. There's an effect called liquefy, and that can warp the image. So let's say there's a photo taken of yourself, and it was taken in an awkward position, and it makes your jaw look really wide. So the liquefy effect is a great tool to adjust the size of things. Now, again, you are changing what really is there. If that's not something you want to do, again, it's completely up to you. So to start warping things, we go to filter, and then we can go to liquefy. Now this opens up, and basically what it does is you have the size of the tool here, And you have some different effects up here, like the warp forward tool. I'll just show you a quick example of what this stuff does. So if you wanted to adjust the chin in a bit, then you'd select right roughly there, and then you'd literally just pull, and then it'll adjust the chin in a bit. Now if you do this too much, it will start looking funny, and depending on the size you set, some will work better, some won't work as well. Like if you do just this, that's not going to look very good. Whereas if you did, much larger one, such as that, that would do a much better job because you're warping the whole area at once. So, you could do the fingers a bit too if you wanted. But as you can see, we're actually starting to remove the image from the side. So, of course, this doesn't really look that good at the moment, but just to show you what it does. So we can literally do this to anything. Like if we wanted to make the mouth seem a little longer, or literally even, happier, we can, start lifting it up like that. So the next tool will bring back information. So if you just click and hold on an area, you can reset what you did, and that is super helpful. Okay. The next tool is the pucker tool, I believe. So if you click over here, you can see what it is. And we'll just create a larger size here. So what this does is if you click and hold, it'll push everything into the center. So to give you a better example, like this. So if you wanted to shrink something, like, smaller earrings or smaller pupils on somebody. So that's a cool effect. And as you guessed, this one does the opposite. And then we have push left, which will warp it out of place in that line that you drag, which can give you some really cool and also really weird effects. I'm actually just going to reset this, so I'll go back to the main tool here. Okay, so once you're done editing, then you just go to OK, and then it'll auto-update onto that layer. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is we will use the Content Aware feature in Photoshop, which is an amazing feature. Let's say we wanted to have our image just a little larger, like that, for example. We'll just zoom out a bit here. So we'll try it here to see if it does a good job. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to reference the stuff right beside the area, and it'll fill it in with what it thinks should be there. So the way to do that is you select that area. So I always just overlap just a little bit, and then press Shift Delete. If you go up to Contents, you'll get Content Aware, and this is where the magic happens. So if we click OK, you'll see that it fills in that image with this stuff. So if we hit Command D, now it didn't do a perfect job. You can see that it looks like what it duplicated here. But if you were to glance at this image without knowing that happened, this right as it is, it did an okay job. We can do it again just there and see if we can improve it, or maybe just this part here. And you can see fairly quickly we can start making this look much better than it originally was. Just to kind of push the limits of this, we'll go back to here, and I'll see what happens if we do this. So we'll go to Content Aware, and now look how incredible that is. Literally, it made up the rest of the image. If we go back to what it just did, this is all fake. That doesn't actually exist. So that's what Content Aware created. It extended the neck, the shadows, the hair, each finger with detail. Now, of course, if we were to do it up at the top here, it's not going to create her nose or the other features in her ear. It can only continue the image. If we were to do it to this side, it would work well because it would just continue the image off and the white. So we can try that here. And this is why I want to just overlap just a bit, just so we get a little bit of that data. Okay, and now it's not perfect, but you could go in now and use the liquify tool to bring that back in. All right, so the next thing we'll do is we will create a new project. We'll make sure it's 1920 by 1080, what we want to work with. We'll go to OK. We will get rid of the locked layer there. Again, we held Option and double click there to do that. We'll navigate and scale out just a bit so we can see the full image. We will Command Tab over to where our logos folder was, and we'll bring in our PNG. So I'll click, hold, Command Tab, bring it into here. And now it is a little low quality at the moment, and that's just because we're in the scale mode. What we can do is click and drag and just get it as large as we want, which will be, roughly that. Then we'll hit return, and then you'll see now it's not blurry or low quality anymore. So we'll click this and we will bring it up to the center. Now right now, as it is, this image has transparency, so if I turn on the white layer, you can see there's nothing behind it. But if we were to stitch those together, so let's go to merge layers, or we go to flatten. So now the white layer is in the logo, okay? So it's attached to it. We no longer have transparency. So let's say you've created a logo or been sent a logo or need to work with some sort of image that is like this. It has a background that is one solid color, but you need to remove it. You need the transparency. So in order to do that, we can go to our magic wand tool, and with this layer selected, you just click on whatever you want to remove. So for example, if I actually just wanted to remove the black here, I could do that. Or if I wanted to remove just the orange here, I could do that. And just like that, if I wanted to remove the white background layer. Okay, so that's done. So I'll Command D to deselect it. And then you'll see there's still a couple spots that I need to do it to. So we'll do that. So now that one's gone. Then we'll click here, press delete. We'll go here, click delete. And we'll just repeat this process until the entire image has transparency again. Okay, I think that's all of them. So if I were to bring in the original again, that does have transparency, and scale it up to the same size as we had before, or close to. Okay, so now we have the original one with transparency and the one that we've removed the white. Just to show you how good of a job it actually does by removing the background with the magic wand tool, if we were to zoom in here, you can see the rough edges. Okay, this is just that layer, the one we removed the white from. The top one here has the transparency and the white was never in it. So that's the quality of the image, and that's the quality of the image with the white removed using the wand tool. So it did a pretty good job actually. And of course, the larger source file you're working with, the better result. So if you had a 4K file and you brought that in and removed the white background from it, it would produce a far higher quality result, meaning the edges would be a lot more perfect. And so the idea is you want as large of a source file as you possibly can get. So working with 4K or higher images will produce much better results, because typically if you're working on a website, for example, you don't need 4K images displayed on the website. Still edit 4K, and then at the final stages, export a much smaller resolution, and that way you'll maintain the quality and everything will look great. Okay guys, welcome back. So in this lesson, we'll talk about working with vector files. And a vector file is a file that can be scaled infinitely. Now, vector files are typically created in Adobe Illustrator, for example, but you can still use those files in Photoshop. And the way to do that is, so we have Photoshop open, we can go to File, Open, and then we can go into Logos, and here's a vector file right here, a .eps. Okay, so if we bring that in, it's going to ask me what size I want to make my image. As you can see, it's already set up to 19 inches by 10 inches. We can go to pixels, and that would be a very large image. We could, if we wanted, make this 25,000 width by 13,000 height. Or if we're going to print, which is set up right now for print, CMYK, we can literally, as you know, right now it's 83 inches by 44 inches. So that is a huge file. Okay, and of course it's going to slow down your system, but the quality will maintain, and I just want to show you that for a second. So if we go to OK, it's going to take quite a bit of time to create this, but you'll be able to use that EPS and produce a gigantic banner, for example, if you wanted. So we'll just wait a little longer for this. All right, so now that it's up and created, you can see here that we're looking at 5% scale of the actual image. If we went into 100%, so as big as it actually is, that's what it looks like. So you can see here that it is an amazingly high resolution image. Okay, so that's how you work with EPS vector files. Now we are set to CMYK, which is meant for printing. If you don't want to go to print, that's perfectly fine. I would suggest CMYK for doing things like flyers or business cards. If you're working with just digital content, you know, stuff that's going to be on social media or your website, for example, then you'd want to actually change the mode to RGB. And we do not need a file that big, so let's go to image size, and we can scale by percent or readjust. So in pixels, we'll go back to 1920. Okay, and now we have 4.29%. So if we go up to 100%, then you'll see we're back to where we were before. Now it looks a little soft, and that's because we've converted the file a few times. So what you'd actually want to do is File, Open, go to EPS, and then 1920 by whatever it is. So in this case, it is set to relative. The actual EPS is 1920 by 1035. So we can go to OK, and you can see it's crystal clear now. So that's always the best way to do it. Always work from the EPS, open up the size you want, and then from there, export the size you want based on the project you created. So I brought in an EPS, which is a vector. I made it into a 1920 by just over 1080 file size, which is my canvas size. And then now I'm going to export it at that same resolution or smaller, but never export larger than the actual project you're working with. So we can go to Save As. Now at the very bottom here we have format options. So we can save it as a Photoshop image, which will maintain all the layers we have if we want to re-edit this at a later date. Or we can change it to, for example, an EPS. This will be based on Photoshop EPS, but it still will work, assuming that the layers inside Photoshop are vector. Go to JPEG. You can create a TIFF image. Okay, so that's how you export it. So that's one way to export, or you can go to File, Export, and then Quick Export as PNG. Now, PNG is a fantastic format to use because it compresses really well without losing quality, without visual quality loss, and it also holds transparency. So this is really great for digital delivery of stuff. So you can click that, name it what you want, put it in the folder you want, and then hit Save. Now there's also File, Export, and then Export As, and this will give you pretty similar options to what was before. So Format, you have PNG, JPEG, and with Format you can choose whether to keep the transparency or not, the image size, and so on. And then you click Export at the bottom here, so you can give it a name, and then place it in the folder you want to save it in, and then hit Export. In this lesson, you'll learn how to blur an image. So let's get started. So we have our image inside Photoshop. We have it locked here, so we'll just hold Option and double click. Up in Filter, we have a whole bunch of different options here for effects. So we can choose to sharpen an image, stylize it, and just to give you a quick idea here, so pixelate, for example, let's go to crystallize, and then this is what it'll look like. Okay, so that's one example. Another example is mosaic. That's what that looks like. And there's just a whole bunch of other stuff here that you can experiment with. Another thing we can do is blur the image. So there are a few different options here. Each one will give you a different blur look or style. I like to use the box blur because it's fast and it shows you exactly what we're doing very quickly. So, okay. Now this is good if you wanted to, for example, create a flyer. So you'd import an image, you'd blur it, and then you'd add text over it so the image pops on the background, and the background image will provide you with a texture of some sort to make your image just seem a little more professional, high-end. You'll notice that 99% of flyers or any form of advertisement will feature some sort of image in the background now. Some of them won't be blurred because they'll have a part of the image over here, for example, where it's darker, where white text will show up just fine, so you won't really need to blur it. But blurring can be an effective way to make some great looking flyers. In this lesson, we're going to be removing the graffiti on this pillar. So what we'll do is we will zoom in a bit, and then if you hold space on your keyboard, the space bar will allow you to move around the image without actually moving the image in the layer. So if I don't hold space and try to move it, that's what happens. Okay, but if I undo that and then hold spacebar, the whole thing moves. All I'm doing is actually just moving the navigation. It's the same as doing this. So now that we've zoomed in, we can start looking at our image here and seeing what we need to do. So with the rectangular marquee tool, we will select this and see what Content Aware does. So with the layer selected and the area we want to try to use Content Aware with selected, we'll use Shift Delete on the keyboard. Contents should say Content Aware, and we'll see what it does. Okay, that actually did a really good job, but there are some spots here, so what we could do is go, for example, this, but that doesn't really do a good job. So what we can do instead is use the clone tool, and the clone tool basically works by the same as Content Aware, except you control it. So if you hold Option, you can select the area you want to sample from. If I look around, I think right beside it would be a great spot to sample from. So I'm going to point it right there by holding Option and clicking, and then I've sampled that area, and then I'm going to move over and you can see what happens. Now I'm sampling this one spot here. So if I click over here, you can see that with the little plus sign on the right, it's moving with me, and that's the area I am sampling from. So let's undo that. Let's try this again. So hold Option. I want to sample from, let's say, right there. And we will click there and then just drag down. Okay, and now it didn't do a perfect job, but if you had just looked at this image for the first time, it looks like a company came by and pressure washed the graffiti off. Now if we did want to manually paint out the graffiti that existed before, and we will just drag the graffiti one into here, and then it opened up a new project with the right sizing. We will Option double click to enable us to edit it. Okay, and then what we can do is zoom in, hold spacebar, bring us up to the spot we're looking at, and then using the clone tool, we can probably go in a little more than that. We can sample areas around the image to try to fill it in. Now this will take a lot more time, but you can get some great results by doing this. But in some cases, Content Aware will just work better, and it's much more efficient. So we have our clone stamp tool selected here. Now we can change the size if we want to sample from, but I think a size around this should work the best. And all we're going to do is just sample right beside where we're drawing here. So we're going to sample right there, and then I'm just going to draw right there. And then I'm going to sample there, and I'm going to draw there. And I'm going to sample there, or maybe here. I'll go a little taller. Sample here. I'll sample here. We'll just keep doing this process. And then you can see here, I might have to use up here a little bit. Or maybe down here. To start getting it to look like it blends properly. Now for stuff like this, you'll just have to use, something like this here. And I brought down a little too much, so we'll undo that and try up here. And then we'll just keep doing that. So if I want to get rid of this stuff, I'll just keep sampling around here. And I could draw all the way across if I wanted to. So we'll try right here. Why don't we try increasing this size a bit? So we'll try sampling. So we'll sample right on the gray here. We'll just draw right across. Try that again. Okay, maybe right here. Okay, now it also doesn't have to look like it originally did here, because people aren't going to see the original image, they're only going to see the after edited image. So just keep that in mind when you're working on this stuff. You can literally change anything you want. So we'll just do this here. So I'm actually going to change the size of this just a bit. Okay, we'll go back here and I'll sample some stuff here. I'll just try to draw in, make it look like it's not all the same image. Maybe sample up here a bit, just to try to clean up some of this stuff. So here would be a good spot too. So you can go there and then just do that. And then from here, we can go up and just try to get rid of some of the areas that look like it was duplicated. We'll just try to keep it the same color though. Okay, so we'll go maybe there. We'll just patch up some of these duplicated spots. Okay, and literally we're just painting and recreating what was there. If we zoom out here, you can see it produced a different result than content aware, and it took much longer. Depending on how much time you have and what you're trying to do, this may be a better way to do it, but this also may not be a better way to do it. And that brings us to the end of the course. So thanks for enrolling, and always keep in mind that in Photoshop, it's all about the layering system. When you have 25 layers going, each layer represents a different part of the image or an effect, and the order of the images can affect how things are displayed and how things show up. If you're having an issue, you can try troubleshooting by just literally moving the layer to a different position, or you can turn off the eyeball of one of the layers or all of the layers but the one that you think is giving you the issue, and confirm that that is the problem layer and adjust from there. Okay, so thanks again for enrolling in our course, and hope to see you in the next one.